Hey, so for this week's reading, we looked at Francis Bacon's Novum Orgnanum, specifically the sections on the four idols and the inductive method. I found this work to be very, very philosophical and part of his larger plan to, change the way they viewed knowledge and science in early Europe. He was laying out, like, guiding principles rather than just telling a story. And the text asks big philosophical questions about how humans can know the truth about nature and just the world that they could see. His main concern is that, human reasoning is often influenced by bias and bad habits, which he called idols. And I feel like, nowadays we call them idols too, but just in different ways. But to fight this, he proposes a new method, which is careful step by step induction based on experiments and observations. So, the type of questions that Bacon was asking, he's mainly asking, like I said, philosophical and scientific questions, obviously, such as how do we build reliable knowledge and how do we avoid error, which I thought was kind of interesting. His main claim is that the traditional way of reasoning, especially Aristotle's reliance on logic and speculation, is very much flawed. Instead, he argues for a new way of thinking based on observations and what we can see. And that's what we now know as the foundation to the scientific method in general. He supports his case with logical reasoning and vivid examples showing how much human minds naturally jump to conclusions or get trapped by words and traditions. He makes this argument, like I said, by pointing out the four idols that distort our thinking, which are one, the tribe, the idol of tribe, which it's our biases that we all share just because we're humans, like seeing patterns that aren't really there. Our senses are limited, which means our minds try to find patterns even when there's not any to find. And we tend to overvalue or over examine evidence that wasn't meant to confirm our expectations, but we force it to in a way. I mean, in short, it's the flaws of human nature itself. And then second, we have the idols of the den, which are our own personal biases shaped by our upbringing, our habits, our experiences, personal background, education, temperament, things like that. I mean, everyone has their own, like, cave or den that kind of forces them to see the world in their own way. And then third, we have the idols of marketplace. These come from confusion caused by language and communications. Words can be very, very vague, misleading, or, try to force somebody to have false assumptions, which can lead to confusion and arguments that are really about just the words that were said rather than what they were actually talking about to begin with. And then finally, the fourth one is the idol of theater, which is big inherited systems of thought. These are the false systems of philosophy or science that people inherit from tradition. And Bacon compares them to, like, stage plays. That's why it's called the idols of theater. Entire worldviews are theories that may look convincing, but are really fake and misleading. So, from a Christian's point of view, I think Bacon's work has a lot of value, but also very much some limits. On the positive side, I appreciate his desire for, the pursuit of truth. And by pointing out the four idols, he reminds us that human beings are prone to error and self-deception. That lines up well with Christian understanding of the fall and of sin, that our minds, like our hearts, are affected by sin and pride. And his emphasis on careful observation and testing can help us avoid rushing to conclusions and instead respect the order God placed in creation. And in that sense, his inductive method can be seen as a way of faithfully studying the world that God has made. But at the same time, I think his vision was incomplete. He seems to believe that through method and discipline alone, we can free ourselves from error and eventually Mother Nature just completely. But from a Christian's perspective, we know our minds will always be limited and fallen, and no amount of method can completely remove sin, bias, or pride. We don't need just good reasoning, but we also need wisdom, humility, and ultimately dependence on God. And another issue that Bacon is almost silent about is the purpose of knowledge. For Christians, knowledge of creation isn't just for control or power, it's meant to glorify God and serve others. Bacon, he hints at improving the kingdom of man, but he doesn't actually anchor that in any higher moral or spiritual calling. He just almost pushes us to do it ourselves. And overall, I'd say Bacon, he's right to criticize the old systems of philosophy and push towards a more grounded way of learning, but without connecting knowledge back to its divine source and purpose, how it ultimately came to be in the first place, we really have no way of knowing, and it leaves it feeling almost incomplete. Science can tell us a lot about how creation works, but only faith can tell us why it matters. So I'll end with two questions that I was left wondering about. First, if human reason is always affected by the idols and by sin, can science or philosophy ever really get us to the full truth without God's revelation? Or does true wisdom always require both faith and reason together? And then second, Bacon talks a lot about knowledge as a tool for human progress to move forward. But from a Christian perspective, knowledge should ultimately point us back to God. So my question is, how do we make sure that our pursuit of science and discovery today isn't just about power or control, but more about stewardship of creation and glorifying the Creator? I'd love to hear your thoughts.